Okay, so the first presentation is an overview of Indonesia's economic development, specifically with regard to industrialization. So why is it that in the case of Singapore, Singapore has industrialized rapidly? And why is it that in the case of Indonesia, right, industrialization is much slower? What is it in Indonesia? What differentiates Singapore and Indonesia? Singapore does not have natural resources. Indonesia has, right? Same with Malaysia, same with the Philippines, same with Thailand. They all have natural resources. But what is common between Indonesia and Malaysia, and also Brunei, of course, these three countries, what is the common denominator among these three countries? Oil. Oil is the common denominator, which means that because they have oil, oil and gas, this is the natural resource that slowed down their industrialization, so that they relied heavily on the oil revenues in the 1970s when the prices of crude oil increased. Right? But when the prices of crude oil fell in the 1980s, they started to diversify. Diversify means moving away from oil and gas products towards non-oil and gas products. And this industry, we refer to the textile and clothing products plus the electronics and electrical products. Right? So while the oil boom benefited Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei, Indonesia's industrialization has been slowed down with the reliance on oil. But when the international prices of crude oil collapsed or started to collapse, Indonesia could no longer continue to rely on it, and therefore there is a need to diversify. Right? That's what we call product diversification, away from oil and gas towards non-oil and gas, including textile and clothing plus electrical and electronic products. Okay? In the case of Singapore, there is no reliance on oil and gas. We have no natural resources. So it's a straightforward, pragmatic policy for Singapore, and that is to develop industrially by relying on manufactured products. And we have seen the different, we have analyzed the different types of products that Singapore has relied on, and the changes in the industrial structure of Singapore, away from labor-intensive manufactured products in the 60s and 70s, towards capital-intensive, high-value added, and of course, high-tech industries. Okay? All right. There is a mention of corruption, and of course, we have to analyze how corruption has impacted industrialization. What is the relationship between corruption and industrialization? So what if the government is corrupt? What happens when the government is corrupt? So what if the government is corrupt? That's the allegation, right? That the government is corrupt. What happens? There is a link between corruption and growth, as well as between corruption and industrialization. And of course, it has related also to the attraction of that particular country to foreign direct investments as well. So if the country is found to be corrupt, right, then that is a deterrent for foreign investors to come. and hence industrialization will be affected. And more importantly, when there is a corruption of, let's say, when money is taken away, let's say $400 billion, this is the global worth of corruption. It's estimated by the World Bank. Maybe it's an underestimate. That means that that amount is siphoned off from government resources. It's taken from government coffers, and therefore it goes into the private hands, into the private pockets, whether they are used internally, all right, or whether they are used externally. There's a difference between being corrupt internally, using the proceeds of internal corruption within an economy, and corruption in which the proceeds are invested or siphoned away from the country. Let's say deposited in Switzerland. That's the difference, right? Because in the internal, when corruption is internally done, then it is possible that corruption may stimulate the economy. But when the proceeds of corruption are invested outside the country, then that is, of course, it will not stimulate the economy. And there are countries in which government leaders, the proceeds of their corruption are invested in the US, in Switzerland, and in other countries. That is dangerous to the economy. But we don't say that corruption is good, although if it is used internally, but somehow it helps stimulate the economy when they are invested locally or internally. Okay, right, so that's the, so in this particular presentation, I would like you to think about the different factors that have affected the industrialization of any country, and in this particular case, we have Indonesia. Right? And you may relate it to the case of Singapore. Differentiate the two. Singapore has industrialized faster, Indonesia has industrialized slower. So what differentiates these two as far as industrialization is concerned? One is reliant on natural resources, the other one does not have any natural resources. Okay, thank you. Next group, we have the second group. Industrialization in Southeast Asia.